Welcome, everybody. I'm sorry I'm out today. My son is sick. I should be back tomorrow. In this video, we're going to do the notes covering the 1980s and the end of the Cold War. This is going to be the president during the 1980s, most of the 1980s. This is Ronald Reagan. So we'll talk about him real quick, and then talk about how the Cold War comes to an end. Reagan campaigns and talks to the American people about how the 70s were this very difficult time in the United States, and he wants the 80s to be what he calls morning time in America, that we're making a comeback, that America should, we made it through the darkness, and now it's time for the light again, that he wants America to stand up strong against communism, stand up strong for the economy, all these things that America needs its confidence back. And he was a really good speaker, a really good communicator, that a lot of people in the 80s believed what he said, and they trusted him, and he kind of rebuilt some of that trust with politicians, and people just liked what he was saying. So his goals as president were to stand up to communism, be tough. Nixon in the 1970s was a step back. He wants to take that step forward. He's going to be tough in Berlin and demand that the Berlin Wall comes down and that Germany gets reunited. He's going to build up the U.S. military, specifically with something called SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative. It is nicknamed Star Wars because it is a very modern and very technologically advanced defense system. I'll explain here in a second. All of this is meant to put pressure on the Soviet Union, make it harder and harder for them to compete with the United States. So here's the Star Wars idea. The idea is that if the Soviets launch a nuke at the United States, our satellites will see it in the sky and we'll be able to shoot it down from the sky. Our satellites, in theory, could shoot it down with lasers. That was sort of like a futuristic sci-fi idea, but the idea was that you could knock out Soviet nukes in the sky before they hit us. And remember, one of the big fears is that if you launch your nukes, the other country will launch theirs and we both get destroyed. But if the U.S. builds this, we could launch all our nukes and there's nothing the Soviets can do back because we can defend ourselves against a nuclear attack. If we could build this, we would win the Cold War. And this freaks the Soviets out because they're nowhere near having this sort of technology. Right? So they're going to have to pump billions of dollars into their military and technology to try and keep up with the United States. Now, the U.S. wasn't that close to getting this either, but they sold it as if we were. Like, hey, we're about to have this thing. And it really freaked out the Soviets, and they're going to put a ton of money into trying to create this. In a lot of ways, it destroys their economy. The U.S. economy, very successful. I'm not going to get into it too much, but the 80s were a wealthy decade for the United States. On the other side of the world, we got the Soviet Union. Is going to have some problems. The 1970s were good for them. The 1980s are going to be tough. The 1980s start with the Soviets getting involved in a war in Afghanistan. They're going to invade and have a very difficult time there. Kind of like the U.S. had a difficult time in Vietnam, Soviets will have a difficult time in Afghanistan. All right, they're unable to conquer, and the U.S. is going to give money and weapons to the rebels who are fighting back. Ultimately, this is going to cost billions of dollars to the Soviet Union, thousands of lives, and it's going to last for 10 years. And just like Vietnam almost destroyed our country, this is going to put the Soviet Union on the path to destruction. So the Soviet Union is wasting billions of dollars trying to build new technology that they can't build. In the meantime, they're fighting an unwinnable war in Afghanistan, losing money, soldiers. The people at home are unhappy, and they're starting to get angry. Here's some pictures from Afghanistan. So a lot of major things happen at the end of the 1980s. The Berlin Wall does come down. We talked about that a few weeks ago, that some miscommunications happen and people show up and they start ripping this wall down with little hammers and axes. And Germany eventually gets reunited. The Soviet economy starts to completely collapse. It completely falls apart. And the new leader in the Soviet Union, his name is Gorbachev, I'll show you a picture of him in a second, starts saying, hey, this isn't working. Our system doesn't work anymore. We need to make some changes. So he starts allowing for some more freedoms, freedom of the press, rights to vote, freer economy. He opens the door a little bit, and people are unhappy with that. Like, that doesn't go far enough. So they keep demanding more and more changes, more and more, faster and faster. And the Soviet Union's trying to keep their people happy because they know they're on the verge of like a civil war, maybe, but at the same time, they want to keep control. Ultimately, it doesn't work. The Soviet Union's going to collapse. All these different countries are going to break off. And this was actually a really dangerous time because there were a lot of Soviets who said, hey, we're on the verge of collapse. We're about to lose the Cold War. Let's go for a Hail Mary. Let's launch all of our nukes. Last second, let's just take out the United States. If we're going down, we're taking them with us. So it was a really risky time. Luckily, the Americans helped negotiate. The Soviets chose not to do this and decided to peacefully fall apart. Here's the guy who was in charge, Gorbachev, the last leader of the Soviet Union. He helps to peacefully let the Soviet Union collapse. And it falls apart into like 15 different countries. Russia's going to be the biggest, but there's like Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Belarus. There's a lot of other countries that break off. And that's the end of the Cold War. For today's activity, there's an assignment in Schoology that you just need to read and answer some questions. Send me a message if you need help.